All right, let's welcome back longtime friend of the show, the one, the only, Matt Brown, Extra Points newsletter, Going for Two podcast. Sir, how goes it? How are you in the heart of the Midwest, Chicago, Illinois?
That's right, I'm so glad to be here. I'm doing great. There's an almost sense of optimism, I think, for those of us in our line of work after the season. It's not that I didn't enjoy college football. It's not that I'm certainly gonna miss it over the come May when I'm going to be looking through YouTube for some like Division II game. But like right afterwards, the whole wide off season's kind of your oyster. Like there's it's kind of like the first day of summer vacation. Only it's 15 degrees outside.
For you, 15
Yeah.
degrees outside, a little bit warmer here, thankfully. But I want to push back on that point, if I could.
Okay, sure.
For me, for Dan, that is sort of the case. When they stop playing the games, it is kind of like a moment in time where we can catch our breath. For you, is that true?
Well, it's funny. I probably have been more busy over the off season the last couple of years than I am during the year because I'm still watching the 9-10 hours of college football, but I'm not expected to write a recap or an analysis of what happened in that game.
Right.
But I'm from thinking back, all right, Extra Points launches in 2020. We had COVID, had to pretend to be an epidemiologist or something going on over there. Last year, we had the Alston case, and we all had to pretend to be labor attorneys and of course, conference realignment and television deals. And then this year, there's going to be some very big legal and political shifts. And certainly, there's going to be a lot going on this beat. But also, my non-industry people, they're going to be watching college basketball. They're going to be watching, the NFL. They're going to be watching the NBA a little bit. So even though I always have something to write about, it's not quite as stressful, I think, as it is in August and September, which is nice, right? The rest of college football internet gets to like rank Pokemon or talk about pizza toppings or something, and then like I have like my little the corner of the world that's still chugging along. It's a good system.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you can at least take a moment in time to catch your breath to some degree. What keeps you up at night currently?
What keeps me up at night? Candidly, there's a bunch of stuff that keeps me up at night about being a publisher that's kind of independent of the college sports world. Like, I don't think I'm telling tales here. A large chunk of my audience comes from Twitter. That's how a lot of ways that other people, reach their audiences, and that's a little bit less stable. I think within the college sports world, I don't know if it's keeping me up at night, but it's definitely the sword kind of hanging over my schedule and my plan. Is there are two gigantic threats to the legal status quo for how college sports is organized. Like I'm making the air quotes here around amateurism. One of those is the National Labor Relations Board. One of those is the federal court system, to say nothing of what might happen in Congress. And that, if those things change, that blows up so much of what we know and assume about college sports. It blows up the entire NIL ecosystem. It blows up potentially conferences. It blows up how scholarships work. And like, that's a story I have to get right, right? Everyone else is going to be kind of scrambling. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about too, because there's so much I don't know, even though I think I probably know a little bit more about this world than the average bear.
So I want you to unpack that, because I was hoping we would get there with it. I know it's a complex, nuanced issue, but it does feel as if it is the asteroid headed towards us in the year of our Lord 2023, right? We had NIL, we had all sorts of stuff go down with media rights and alignment, and maybe we can talk about that if we have time. But it seems like this year, as you alluded, that's going to be the story.
That I think so. And I have a lot of empathy for people that are like, Matt, I watch college football so I don't have to think about things like antitrust exemptions. And I have empathy for them. I'm like, bear with me. Let me try to get through this in the least boring way possible, so people can kind of understand like what's happening, right? So with NIL and with the Alston case and with some of these changes, we had college athletes that can now earn money even though they're not directly getting it from the school. Sometimes that's through a business, sometimes it's through a collective that's pretending it's through a business, but it's really just a bagman kind of thing. And that system has worked in some ways, and it has colossally not worked in other ways. Maybe we can talk about those. But it hinges on this idea that the athlete is not an employee of the school and can't get the money directly from them. CJ Stroud might have given millions of dollars in value to Ohio State, but Ohio State can't cut the check. They has to rely on other people to do that. And there are outside forces that might change that. Well, one of these is a federal case in your neck of the woods in Pennsylvania that is likely to get an initial decision in 2023. A group of FCS football players at places like Bucknell and Villanova have sued, saying we should have been considered employees, and our schools owe us minimum wage, and they need to be paying payroll tax and workers' compensation and all of those things. They're not asking for millions of dollars, but they're saying like we, met the federal definition of an employee. And that will probably be appealed. So like the final say probably won't happen this year, but there will be developments in that case. We also have a group called the National Labor Relations Board. And this is the government entity that helps adjudicate when unions start, settles labor disputes. And they are investigating whether athletes at not just USC and UCLA, but throughout the Pac-12 and the entire country, or the whole NCAA, whether they have been improperly classified and if they should be employees. And that also probably won't be completely resolved this year, but the hearings for that are going to start in like 6 weeks. And then there's going to be appeals and it's going to go back and forth, but it will work its way through that system. My best professional projection here, and this is one that's shared by many of the attorneys that I'm talking to, is that the NCAA is highly unlikely to win both of those.
Wow.
In fact, they may very well go 0 for 2. We'll see what happens if it goes to the Supreme Court or if it goes to any other places here. But the idea that amateurism as we know it may become legally extinct is not just a hypothetical. Like that is something we can look and see within 16 months. And so that is why the new president of the NCAA is not an AD or president or an administrator.
It's a politician.
It's a politician. And when I was at the NCAA convention, about a week ago, I got a chance to talk to Baylor president, Dr. Linda Livingstone, who's the head of the NCAA Board of Governors, got the chance to talk to Governor Charlie Baker, who's the new head of the NCAA, and talk about what is it you're trying to do? What are your goals for this year? It's 100% centered on working with the federal government, working with Congress to potentially head off these existential threats.
That was going to be my question. Yeah. So is that the direction in general of the NCAA now, led by Charlie Baker? They're trying to get out in front of these court cases, pass some sort of provision. Maybe you can explain what their ideal state would be, but at least get this whole thing to a place where it feels stable and it doesn't feel like something's going to undercut them.
That's what it is. As frustrating as this might sound, like the big NCAA story right now is about government lobbying rather than about recruiting calendars or enforcement or anything else. So the NCAA wants Congress to grant 3 things. I'll try to explain what these things mean. So one of them is they want a federal law, passed by the House and the Senate, get Biden to sign it, that says this new federal college sports law preempts all the other state laws. So we have, over 24 state-specific NIL laws right now. And a couple of those NIL laws say other things about college sports, and they're not the same. We have some states that say you are legally required to tell schools the NIL deal that you signed. You have some states that say, actually, you are legally required to not do that. You have a right to privacy. Some states say you can't do something with gambling. Some say you can. Some say you can't do something with porn. Some say you can. And the NCAA is like, we literally cannot do any NIL policy or anything that would, where there's 26 different laws. We need one national standard. You've probably heard a coach or an AD talk about this too. It's a source of deep frustration, particularly among football coaches right now. Now, in practice, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter because none of these states are enforcing any of these laws. It's not like the Florida Highway Patrol is going to come arrest the Gator Collective for recruiting crimes. Like that's not really how this works, but that's one thing they're asking for. They're also asking for Congress to say college athletes are not employees. So it doesn't matter what the NLRB says. It doesn't matter what the 7th District Court says. We're making a law that says they're not employees, and therefore they can't unionize. They don't have collective bargaining. We don't have to give them payroll tax, these other things. And then the third thing is they want what's called a limited antitrust exemption. I think Major League Baseball has this. There's a couple examples within professional sports broadcasting. But basically, they're saying if we don't have this, if we try to investigate somebody for NIL rule violations, or if we try to honestly do anything with the NCAA infractions, we're going to be sued. And maybe we win, maybe we lose. Probably we lose. And the only way to prevent constantly being sued is to have a carve out from this labor law. So these are the three things that they're asking for. There's a couple of big problems, though. Setting aside whether this is good policy or not, and I'm trying not to be partisan in this kind of conversation. Not that I know how many people here have like really passionate opinions about antitrust law. One is they tried this last year too, and none of these bills got out of committee. And that was when Democrats controlled everything, and now the Republicans control the House. So presumably it will be harder to pass anything. And guys, like the Republicans didn't have a speaker for like a week. It's a complicated mess over there right now. And the dirty little secret about DC is that most of these guys and girls do not care about college sports at all. We have a lot more Yale people than we have Alabama people, like in the House and the Senate. And there's not like some constituent group that's like, I am a single issue voter, and that issue is college football.
No.
You would think that might exist in a place like Ohio or a place like Tennessee, but not really. And so when you think of all the things that a politician has to worry about right now, this is generally not one of them. So this is the key question, I think, for this year. Do you get Congress to do this? And we could talk about what might happen if they do or if they don't. And if you don't, odds are somebody else is going to say college athletes are now employees. And that will happen pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, that was going to be my question. What kind of appetite do you feel exists for Congress, for really any congressman?
Yeah.
And anybody with any kind of political capital? Why would they care about this? Why should they care about this?
Why should they and why might they might be two different things.
Sure.
So and I'm going to try to look at this as charitably as possible, because you can be very cynical about this kind of thing. I'm going to try to avoid doing that. The idea of if you don't do this, then the worst thing that will happen is we have NIL chaos was not a very compelling argument to many senators who do not have Rivals subscriptions, or their staffers do not have Rivals subscriptions. Right. And NIL chaos on some level did happen, but the world didn't end. And you're right, there wasn't a major appetite. There were some people who were highly invested. A lot of these Democratic senators wanted something with more expansive reform, meaning they wanted to guarantee health insurance for college athletes. They wanted to guarantee collective bargaining rights for athletes as part of a broader labor bill. There's even some Republicans who are interested in this. Mitt Romney at Utah, Marsha Blackburn, Tennessee, former football coach Tommy Tuberville, at Alabama. And they've tended to want as narrow as possible. As you might expect, these are not groups that tend to be overly sympathetic to organized labor. So it was hard to get them all to agree. What I think is possible, though, is let's say it's this summer and the NLRB has already ruled once, and it's indicating further that they're going to rule that college athletes are going to be employees, and that's where this thing ends. And then you have not just Charlie Baker, but I think athletic directors and university presidents and coaches from all these other states saying, if we don't fix this, we might have to get rid of half of our college sports offerings.
Wow.
Or we might, whether they will or they won't, like that can be a thing that they say, right? Or, hey, what might make sense for Michigan does not make sense for Western Michigan. Or here are the potential unforeseen outcomes from moving to this. And the only people that can fix it are us senators. I don't know if that will work necessarily, but I think that's a much more compelling pitch than what they were offering 18 months ago. The other thing, too, that we can't discount, honestly, is almost everybody hated Mark Emmert. And bringing in a new person who is a better communicator, maybe speaks politician, may help the NCAA get into some doors that they weren't in before.
Right. So the way that you've outlined this is there's a doomsday scenario that could, as you said earlier, blow everything up. There is obviously a more middle of the road path that feels like we'll end up with, as we do with most things. It seems a stretch to me that Congress is just going to go for it, and that suddenly they're going to back the NCAA and they're going to maybe head off this whole thing, which, as you said at the top, is sort of what the NCAA is hoping for. That seems like a stretch given where the NCAA is at, where Congress is at, right? That would require a lot to go, I think, in lockstep, which doesn't seem likely to me. What is the doomsday scenario here if this comes to fruition, and if the Labor Relations Board decides that everyone's an employee of a university? What does that mean? What are the ramifications for that? And then, I guess, secondly, what is the middle of the road solution that doesn't mean everything gets nuked, but still means we have significant changes look like?
It's a really good question. And one of the things that makes a lot of this challenging is that we don't really have a lot of other industries to compare this to. So the obvious thought would be, well, all the professional sports leagues in the United States are employees and they have unions and they sign collective bargaining agreements, right? It's like the idea of, for example, setting up a group here in Chicago to raise donations to the Chicago Bears so they could sign a better free agent and have like an NIL, like a Bears collective.
A Patreon.
A Patreon, right? Yeah. That would be ridiculous. And it would be ridiculous because nobody wants to give money to the Bears unless you're like the state of Illinois and thinking about a new stadium. But you wouldn't do that to help get Justin Fields some offensive linemen. You would say that's the Bears' problem. And also the collective bargaining agreement forbids it. Like the idea of like trying to spend money to get around a salary cap generally has some significant consequences. And I could see a world where that is where NIL ends up looking like, where a lot of these collectives and a lot of these outside fundraising groups disappear because that will be regulated spending by the schools or whatever this new body ends up being. And it will be hard to get people to want to donate if they see that everyone on the roster is making $200,000 and you're bringing in this gigantic television deal. So that would obviously change the business of the sport. The challenge is who's the union and who's in the union? What kind of union does it look like, right? Is the bargaining unit the Big Ten and all Big Ten athletes are in here? Well, the interest of a Big Ten baseball player, which is like not a power conference,
not at all,
and a Big Ten football player, very different, which would make it hard to agree on anything. Is it just football players? Well, one at Coastal Carolina or Western Michigan might be different. Even we even saw this during COVID. On the same roster, it might be different. At a place like Ohio State, the top 45 guys all have NFL aspirations, but maybe somebody near the bottom of the roster doesn't. They might want for different things. And that's a struggle for all of these. The other challenge with setting up a union and everything is that college athletes don't stay in college for that long. People cycle out 4, 5, 6 years, and everybody, Stetson Bennett and a handful of LDS missionaries aside, they're like under 22, which would make that one of the youngest unions in the entire world, to say nothing of the United States. Like ask anybody that works in labor, organizing a McDonald's is hard. Right. Because they're younger and they're not going to be there for very long. And that's what this world would look like. So I'll say one potential, doomsday scenario here is we end up with the collective bargaining agreement. We end up towards the employee model and things get worse for most athletes, even football players, because theoretically a scholarship then becomes something you can negotiate over or any other kinds of benefits. And so some of the things that everybody gets could be taken off the table. And maybe only the Caleb Williams of the world's benefit. I think that's a legitimate concern. There's a legitimate concern about, does this mean that you take away more scholarship opportunities? I was talking to an AD at the convention who put it to me this way, that like across Division I and Division II, the NCAA offers like 190 something thousand athletic scholarships. And if the costs dramatically increase to where schools have to cut some of those, maybe we get rid of the bowling team, maybe we get rid of the cross country team or the tennis team. We may end up with a world where there's 50,000 fewer scholarships to go to college. And for all of the bad things about college sports, it's one of the biggest scholarship programs in the entire country. And do 50,000 people now lose out on a more affordable pathway to college? Are they all absorbed by academics or by the Pell Grant program or something? Like that's a societal question that has to be grasped.
Right.
That being said, it may very well be that it's more ethical and it makes better business sense and it's more legal to make all college athletes employees. I think the middle ground question, and I hope that everybody involved can find a way to make this work, would be the fencer at Northwestern. That life probably is closer to a marching band trombone player or a student newspaper editor than a full-fledged employee. Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud, JJ McCarthy, we shouldn't have to pretend that they have a marketing value of $2 million that we flow through a charity. Given the amount of time that they spent at university, they're probably closer to being an employee. And if there's a world where we can pay those people what they deserve from Michigan and not through some shady third-party person who's pretending to be an agent, and we let the fencer keep doing their fencing thing, I think that would be ideal. But I didn't pass the bar, right? And the way to figure that out legally and legislatively and administratively, that might be outside the scope of a humble newsletterman like me.
Well, but what's interesting about that is even if that is the quote unquote middle of the road solution, doesn't that also kind of spell doomsday for some of the mid-tier FBS programs?
It might. And I've heard fans and I've heard administrators say this, and I think my follow-up question would be, when in college football world have the mid-majors ever been at level playing field with the big boys? The Western Michigan has not gotten the same guys or had the same resources or the same anything as Michigan since time immemorial. So in a world where maybe the Michigan athletes are now W-9 employees and the Western Michigan ones aren't, we have a decision. Maybe do we, I don't know if you want to keep them in the same competitive playing field or not, but
right.
I don't know if that's dramatically different from where it is now, because quite frankly, Michigan, I'm saying this as an example. I'm not accusing anybody of anything here. Like, Michigan's going to have NIL opportunities that will provide a full-time salary in a way that some of these mid-majors can't. And if you scout really well and you develop really well and have a good culture, you can still win a lot of football games. And if you don't have those things, you're Texas. And like, those teams still find a way to lose.
Right.
But I can certainly see how this could make it harder.
Yeah. The other interesting component of this is I don't suspect any of the schools, if we want to use Michigan as an example, would be all that eager to part ways with some of the newfound revenue they're going to get from this big media deal. That said, if it's an existential crisis and if they truly have no choice, I suspect they'll find a way to do it if they have to.
I agree. And that's part of what makes this timing interesting, because it's happening at a time when there's a ton of new revenue coming in, not just from multiple leagues signing new TV deals, but the college football playoff is expanding, and which could triple the amount of money coming in. So it's not an accident that some of this is happening now. Actually, lawmakers in California just a couple of days ago, state lawmakers there proposed a bill that will require UCLA and USC to share some of that revenue explicitly, and that might happen in other states there as well. The question that has not really been answered for me when I talk to people on the NCAA side is, what are you willing to give up to get what you're asking for? Because most times when you go to Congress for something and they tell you to do it yourself and you beg them again, there's usually some kind of give and take. Are you willing to guarantee health insurance for a decade to get some of these things? Are you willing to share some of the revenue in some trust? Are you willing to revisit this in 5 years? And I don't know, right? They're kind of, the last pitch was, we're not willing to give up anything, and lawmakers kind of told them to kick sand. So we'll see what happens here.
The last, I think, status check that you gave us with respect to the NCAA is that they were way in over their heads with NIL, with just this levy that has broken with respect to new policy. They can't put effective guardrails up around the transfer portal to make that a little bit more organized, albeit they are trying. NIL has clearly been a tidal wave that has overtaken the NCAA. As you said earlier, they have trouble investigating even simple issues. Are they at all in a place where they've got the bandwidth to make this kind of push? Because this is a big deal. This is probably bigger than all the things combined that we've been talking about for the last 3 years.
It could be the biggest deal, right? Yeah. I've heard this joke, and it might not even be a joke, that like, there's no pressure on Charlie Baker, but if he gets this wrong, he's going to be the last NCAA president.
Exactly.
Like, that's right.
It's done. It's over.
It's going to be a weird end to his Wikipedia article about, the big dig or whatever else he did in Massachusetts. I would say that capacity is trying to change a little bit. What typically happens when you have a new head of an agency like this is that there's going to be a lot of staff turnover. I know a couple of the people that are going to be moving into, the NCAA has been quietly staffing up on infractions and investigations. I believe they brought in at least one ex-FBI person to be involved, which seems like overkill to me, but
yeah,
I know.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So you're going to have some people coming in here who may not be college sports professionals, and that can be a good thing or a very bad thing. And we'll see, because I wouldn't be shocked if the NCAA's capacity to do other stuff diminishes, because they're going to be spending a lot of time in DC and trying to find a way to navigate the court system.
Wow. Well, this is going to be fascinating to watch. I'm sure we'll have you back on at some point after news breaks a little bit more on this front to read us in and help us understand it, because you have your finger on this pulse more so than anybody that Dan or I know around college football. You're doing really good work with this. I
Thank
do
you.
want to ask you about a few other things, if that's
Please.
okay.
Yeah,
And,
let's.
different but related in their own right. We mentioned realignment a couple questions ago. And of course, the USC and UCLA thing is notable. That's the most recent. There was some news that came out, I guess, a little bit before we hit record here, that they're trying to figure things out on the Big 12 side, when Oklahoma, when Texas might ultimately go to the SEC. It looks like 2024, but it could be immediately. There's a chance, who knows? Like, there are things that are very much in flux on both fronts there with respect to realignment. Are we out of the woods now with the broader realignment of college football? Do you think there are any other surprises that are lurking, or are we kind of in a period now of relative calm?
I have now been on this beat long enough that I don't think I ever want to say into a microphone that, like, I think we're out of the woods, because that's where something stupid happens, right? Like, I feel like
Okay.
a couple of these big bombshells have happened when I wasn't expecting it. I will say this. I don't think we're completely done, because whenever the Pac-12 finishes that TV deal, which could be in the next 4 weeks, it could be in the next 4 months, I expect them to take a hard look at San Diego State, as a chance to be able to gain some presence back in Southern California. You have a brand new stadium that could potentially be used for other events. San Diego State's research classification status and their ability to give PhDs has recently changed, which feels like a very funny thing that matters in this world. But to Pac-12 presidents, that is a thing that matters. We know what the Big 12 would like to be in the Pacific time zone. They are unlikely to be able to pry away any current Pac-12 teams. And, like, I've been saying that now for 6 months. I don't think that that's changed, but they're also going to be talking to San Diego State. They'll also be kicking the tires on some of these other places. But I don't expect any big moves from the SEC, Big Ten, or the ACC in the next year. And I can share a little bit that, McMurphy reported this first, and I was able to get confirmation and clarification on this a little. But, back in the beginning of the fall, there were reports about Oregon and then later Washington meeting with the Big Ten and talking through these things, right?
Yeah.
That was, a couple of attorneys, and you had a television consulting company here in Chicago, and another television consulting company in the South that were helping to have some of these conversations. It wasn't a secret that Kevin Warren would have preferred to get up to 20 and have something similar to the NFL, right? Big Ten football, sun never sets on Rosemont or whatever, right? All day long. have another TV window.
Yeah.
But the university presidents in the Big Ten were by and large not nearly as excited about that. In part because it wouldn't give you that much more money. And in some cases, it might dilute your television a little bit. The bigger you get, the more valuable each additional team needs to be before you're cutting the pie into smaller slices. But also they looked and they saw what happened when USC and UCLA, when UCLA jumped to the Big Ten, it became a gigantic political football. You had the regents involved. The governor was complaining about it. You're going to have some a colonoscopy of a state audit into your budgets and everything. And they're looking out and they're seeing lawmakers in Washington and lawmakers in Oregon thinking about doing that same thing. This process can't be a secret the second time along. Is it worth it? Do we need the Huskies that badly to turn this into where we're the bad guys and we're blowing this thing up? Maybe we don't. And that's something else to think about here too. The bigger you get beyond 16, if you're a major league, the bigger the side effects that come with that, both in trying to build a schedule, dealing with lawmakers, dealing with people, nosy reporters filing FOIAs, different egos to manage. Like, that's going to be fun to see for the SEC. And that is something that I think has slowed this process a little bit more than maybe we might have expected compared to last year.
What was the reaction to the piece that you sent out? I know it was half joking, at least half joking, about announcing your own candidacy to be the next Big Ten commissioner.
I think this might hurt my ability to get credentials for the next Big Ten media events. And that's just the risk I'm willing to take at this stage of my career. No, it was funny.
Yeah, I was going to say, we got a question about that on our Patreon show that we do every Thursday, asking which direction the Big Ten should look to head in, kind of their next chapter now with a new person running things. And I cited your newsletter verbatim. I thought you had some good ideas. I know, again, it was very tongue in cheek, but at the same note, like, I have to imagine a chunk of the people that read your newsletter, Extra Points, looked at it and said, hey, this guy actually knows what he's talking about.
It was funny. I did hear from a couple of ADs and a couple of like industry people like, obviously you're joking, right? Like there's a picture of me. If you haven't
you
seen
don't want this job, right?
Right. Well, I'm like literally like I'm wearing a suit jacket and an Ohio State jersey and I'm holding a gigantic bag of money, right? Like let's pay the players. But I have thought about it. I did have some people saying like, you have my vote, or, like you do have a point. I legitimately have more college sports experience than Kevin Warren did when he got that job. I legitimately know more about bylaws and about like the nuts and bolts of governance than Governor Baker did. And that's not because I'm some super genius. It's just because that's part of my world. I don't think I would want that job in real life. Like the joke around the office has been, I would like Turnkey or like whatever search firm to at least call me. I'm like, yeah, let's have the conversation. But it's a job that pays really well, but I don't think I would actually want it. That's a stressful gig.
Let me turn the page and talk about something a little bit more fun now.
Yeah, let's do it.
You know where I'm going with this. You've been our guy for all things NCAA, college football, 2024, 2025, 2026. Who knows when this damn thing's going to come out? They pushed it by a year.
They did. Hopefully before the heat death of the universe, we get a chance to play this on next generation consoles. That's my goal before the PS6 comes out.
Yeah. So you've been our guy on the ground here. You've been pretty good about not only staying up to date with what's going on, but you've broken some news on this front. You had some news about a week or two ago about some of the audio assets that had been sent with respect to Oklahoma and how they were kind of crafting that sound design experience, if you will, on the Oklahoma side. Where is EA Sports at with the next generation of its college football video game?
Yeah, I think there's been a little bit of a misconception about why this project was delayed. Because I think that some well-meaning folks on the outside looked at this and thought, oh, they must be pushing it back because of licensing. They haven't figured out NIL. They haven't figured out how to pay everybody yet. Or they haven't gotten every school on board. And that's why they want to put it back a year. And people at EA and people with the CLC and folks within the licensing world have told me that wasn't really the case. And while it's true, the licensing model to pay all the athletes is not finalized yet. A major reason why that's gone slower is because of some legal issues that have nothing to do with Electronic Arts and have everything to do with some of these big licensing companies. But they're like, we'll get there. Like that's we're not super worried about that. It's going to take a while. The biggest reason it was delayed is because the game wasn't ready. Like the nuts and bolts technical infrastructure of the game wasn't ready. There's this idea that you can just report 2014, right? And just drag that into a PS5. Like what I've heard roundly is no, because almost none of those developers are still at the company. That was 2 video game systems ago. None of the architecture works anymore. And also, that's not an NCAA game anymore. We're calling this EA Sports College Football. We want this to be completely new IP, which means we don't want it to be the same thing that it was. We're not saying that we're going to get rid of Dynasty mode or get rid of the things that you loved about it, but this is our one chance to rebuild everything and make it really good. Because, I think consumers probably realize this, but for the video games that are annual for sports games, like they're not building a completely new NBA 2K every single year. They're changing the rosters. They're adding like 1 or 2 new features. They're getting a new celebrity cameo for the career mode. They're going to charge another $100 for it. And like the college football game that comes out after this college football game will not be a completely new product. They're going to make some tweaks. So you want to make sure that the framework, the architecture of the game is best as it can be. And, by pretty late in the football season is when they, as I understand it, they reached that conclusion that this is going to have to get moved back. And hopefully it's ready in the summer before the 24 season.
So that is a target, the summer before the 24 season.
Yeah, that's the target for that July. And the other thing is they're hoping more people have PlayStation 5s by then. Because this is not going to be something that's going to be released on the PS4 or the last version of Xbox. I don't think it's going to be on the Nintendo Switch. And, as a lot of us realized, it was hard to get a PS5 coming out of COVID. There were shortages everywhere. Hopefully by next summer, anybody that wants one of these things will be able to get one.
The most recent reporting you've done on the game has been around the audio assets, which is near and dear to our hearts here at the Solid Verbal, given our attention to detail with respect to all things audio. But what have you learned on that front that you found interesting?
Yeah, I'm going to actually see while we're talking, I can pull up the exact spreadsheet so I can kind of cite chapter and verse exactly what's in these kind of things. So over the summer, EA asks every single school that's participating in the game, like we want as authentic of a stadium experience as we could possibly get. So we're going to take like 2,000 photos of your stadium from every possible angle so we can render it in 3D. Not just the stadium itself, but what you see, in the horizon, the dorm that's over like the west, sideline or something, the whole thing. And we also want to replicate the in-stadium experience. So if you guys play a song as the team is coming out of the tunnel, even if it's like a copyrighted song by another artist, we want to know what that is. If you play a funny sound effect on third down, we want to know what that is. Right. We don't just want your fight song. If your students do a chant, if a lot of schools do a kind of like production between the third and the fourth quarters, we want that entire thing. And it was a big spreadsheet. It had like 28 different events, and they asked everybody, give us the name of the song. You give us a clip of the audio asset if you've got it, and send it to us. We can't promise we're going to pay for every single license thing, but we're going to make this as authentic as we can. And people at EA said, like, we are going to spend for some of those licenses. So I do think it's safe to assume, barring something unforeseen, like, yeah, the jump around at Camp Randall for Wisconsin.
Oh, that's cool.
Going to be there. Like,
we're so cool.
We're going to go. We're going to get in, enter Sandman for Virginia Tech. And it was kind of surprising, which is how granular everyone's been doing about this. There were, or like, hey, I think Eastern Michigan, when they come out on the field, they have somebody with like a sledgehammer, I think, and like breaks through a concrete wall because like the whole thing is like the factory. Yeah, that was submitted. That's something that EA is going to try to do. We were trying to get the chainsaws for Oregon State, like the whole thing. I can't promise that every single one of those is going to be in the game, but I can tell you, here's what the school sent to Electronic Arts. And that has been the thing that's been reiterated to me again and again. Like, I can't promise it's going to be a perfect game. If you are skeptical about Electronic Arts, I get it. Like, I played the last Mass Effect game. I know that some of these things are duds, right? Like, we understand. But I can tell you that they are trying, they care very deeply about making this as authentic as possible. And that's part of what makes college football cool. It isn't just the RPO, it's the chainsaw on the sidelines and the crazy things and seeing your hometown on a PS5.
It is the very small nuance and these very, very specific traditions that make college football special. That is the lifeblood that makes this whole thing go. And with respect to the video game, the fact that they are trying to incorporate that level of detail is, I think, encouraging, right? It's like that. You were describing this to me. I was thinking of the old computer programming exercise that they would teach you in like Comp Sci 101, where they ask you, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And it's not just you get 2 slices of bread, you smear peanut butter and jelly on it, and then you eat it. No, you actually have to define all the different steps that go into making the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Open the jar, stick knife in jars, scoop, like all of these different process-oriented things. That it sounds like that's where they're at with collecting some of these assets. It's not just what is the vibe when a team comes out onto the field. It's, okay, how do we get the sound of the chainsaw that we can actually put in this thing?
Yeah, and then what can we get away with without messing with rights holders or budgets, right? So like, one of the things that the internet was asking me about is, all right, are they going to put NEC in the game? Is the LSU band going to do that? Is there going to be an option to pay a fine to play NEC if you're up by a lot? And if you do, what student chants are you going to put in the game? Because part of the authentic college football experience, I think, is sometimes hearing things that don't necessarily get an E rating from the ESRB.
I believe that's accurate.
So there's a little bit of a push and pull with trying to figure out how to make this authentic but still brand safe, right? So, well, in case you're wondering, LSU did not submit NEC, but some other schools did. So we'll see if that makes its way into the game or not.
Fascinating stuff, Matt. How much would you say of your day-to-day is people writing with questions about this?
It is the overwhelmingly number one way that I get new readers from people that don't work or study college athletics. I can track, who's got a .edu email address or like an OhioValleyConference.com email address or something, and who's just a guy. And if they're just a guy, a lot of them are interested in realignment, they're interested in money, but it's the video game that they're most interested in. And if I'm doing like a national hit on something, it's more likely to be this than it is the NLRB, which is funny. I don't know if I told you guys this last time. You know what? I kind of became this beat writer on this thing by accident, right? Like, I wasn't looking for this information specifically. I filed a request to learn about a school who was dropping a licensed beer. And it was through those emails that I got the initial project proposal. And like, well, this is way more interesting than
Yeah.
somebody
Oh my
setting
gosh.
up a beer at the University of Nevada. And that's kind of how I fell into it. But yeah, I mean, I think since we've been talking, someone's already asked me about it on Twitter. I can assure all of you who are listening, if I know something, not if I'm not speculating, if I know something, I promise you I'll write it. I'm not good at keeping secrets. I just don't want to, violate on stuff that I can't cite chapter and verse,
One of our interviews that we did with you, it might have been May of 2022 or 2021. It was 1 year in the month of May. We talked about this video game. It was one of the biggest videos that we put on YouTube, the clip. I mean, it just popped. People really are craving more information on this. And it's rare. Let's be honest, it's a rare thing with respect to video games that you get to start over. If you're EA or if you're anybody, that you get to start over and build up a sports franchise from scratch. Most of them have been built over the course of many years already. Madden, they're not going to redo Madden. They're not going to redo fully FIFA. Complicated, right? But it's not often that you have this type of opportunity. So I understand the appetite for the information. I count myself among those that are very, very hungry for more info on this.
I can't wait. I mean, it is. I'm often sending out a request or trying to talk to somebody in this industry multiple times a month. And it's been exciting too, right? Because I play a lot of video games, but I didn't know a lot about the development cycle, and there's a lot of parts of this world I didn't know about. The one thing I will add that maybe your listeners might be interested in, if you are like desperate to scratch this itch and you don't want to wait, there are a couple of indie college football games that are out there. Like if you have Steam, there is a game that I've written about called Football Coach College Dynasty, which is kind of like Football Manager, like if you're into soccer, but just for college football. They obviously don't have the licenses, but if you want to scratch the scouring through recruiting charts and like managing who's getting a red shirt and building a dynasty that way, you can do it. I think it's like $10, and I paid for it. I wrote a story about it. I think it's pretty fun, and I wouldn't be shocked if when the EA Sports game comes out, if there are other independent titles that are not trying to be like a simulation game, whether we end up with a college football trading card game or some mobile games or some other like offshoots of this. I think there's going to be more than one game that comes out.
Yeah. And that's not even to say that if you still have your old PlayStation and the copy of NCAA 14, I've got it back behind me. I don't know if it's visible in the shot here.
I have it just off camera here too.
But you can do all sorts of modifications. There's something called College Football Revamped, which has definitely taken on a kind of a second life now, in the absence of there actually being a title out there. So it's a very interesting world. And if the reaction to some of the videos, some of our conversations with you are any indication, there's a strong appetite for this next version of the game. So I'm excited. One question, I'll close out with this, Matt.
Sure, let's do it.
One question that we got from our community was, maybe you already answered this, but the oddest thing that you found in some of your FOIA requests as you're digging in.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Where this game goes.
Where the game's going. Let me see if I could pull up the audio thing here real quick, because there were a couple that surprised me. I'm thinking like one of the oddest ones, just like in general. I remember I filed a request for what people were saying after the college football playoff rankings during the COVID year, and somebody sent an email to Iowa calling the AD there Gary Farta. He was mad about like BYU and Cincinnati's ranking, and that has stuck with me so much. So whenever people are complaining about Iowa, I just want to Gary Farta send a tweet, which was real.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a bit or anything there either. The thing that part of the thing that's also surprised me a little bit, how often some of these schools use the same audio. A thing that you think is like a special sacred tradition is in fact used by a gajillion other schools.
Right.
And other places that are like trying to like start traditions, like UCF, new-ish program. They're like, yeah, we really have to make sure that we include, can't take my eyes off you, and like this particular segment in the third quarter game. And I remember like texting a couple people I know that went to UCF. It's like, is this some sacred Knights tradition? They're like, no, we just started it. Like it's this new thing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, then that's fine. You can kind of make your own thing. The other thing, and this is like super in the weeds, but I'll share it anyway. One of the challenges has been a lot of schools sell this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is Gary's Honda first down. And like, well, EA is like, we put that in the game. Do we charge this Honda dealership in San Marcos, Texas? Do we have to think of something like different to put in there? And there's not a great answer for it yet, because none of the infrastructure around like the sponsorship stuff accounts for video games, because it hasn't been a thing for a decade. Yeah. So I don't actually know where that ends up going.
That's really fascinating. Really, really fascinating stuff. Again, his name is Matt Brown. Extra Points with Matt Brown is the title of the newsletter. Tell us everything, Matt. Tell people where they can find you, how they can sign up for your newsletter. I'm a subscriber. You do fantastic work. I know you also podcast with our friend Brian Fisher. So give everybody here more of a lowdown of where they can find your work.
I would love to. So Extra Points is a newsletter. It's part of the D1 Ticker family of publications. That's kind of a B2B college sports industry kind of company. Writes 4 times a week, and it covers the off-the-field forces that shape this industry. So that includes EA Sports, that includes Realignment, it includes legal and political and financial forces that shape everything here. It's the kind of place where if you want to hear something from a Division II athletic director, or some weird jokes or something about softball, this is the place, along with about recruiting and NIL and all that stuff. And you can find it at extrapointsmb.com. There is a free option where you get 2 newsletters a week, or you can subscribe and get everything for just $8 a month, which would warm my heart, because that $8 a month goes to things like filing a lot of FOIAs to learn more about the video game, or sending me to San Antonio for the NCAA convention.
How much does it cost to file that FOIA?
Here's the thing. It totally depends. Most places it's free. It should be free. But sometimes you kind of have to do a little bit of a fishing expedition, and there are a handful of schools that will charge you. So I think the most I paid for an EA Sports related one was $200.
Okay.
Which is, for something where I'm looking for some new kind of correspondence that's uncommon. The record was the University of Georgia once tried to charge me $18,000 for a request, and only backed down when I made fun of them on Twitter. And they're like, "Oh, fine, we'll do it for 12." Like it's kind of a scam, and that's because they figure most people are like, I don't need the information that badly, or they don't have an attorney. That's this. I don't just use your subscription money to buy like Lunchables and Mountain Dew. It also gets used for stuff like this.
extrapointsmb.com is where you can go and sign up for the newsletter and the podcast.
Oh, of course. The podcast you can find Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or anywhere, YouTube, anywhere else podcasts are found. It's called Going for Two. It goes once a week. It's free. It's with my colleague, Brian Fisher, digging into off the field forces in this industry that we can't squeeze into a newsletter. That's called Going for Two. Beautiful.
Well, look, it's always a pleasure to have you on. You're always the smartest guy in our virtual room. So thank you for imparting some of your wisdom on the verballerhood. We will have you back, I'm sure, at some point over the next couple of weeks or months here, as some of these topics start to come to their natural conclusion or begin on that journey. It seems like we're going to be here for a while, Matt. But
yeah.
So suffice to say, we're glad to have you as somebody we can call and explain it to us.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to come on anytime. I hope that this was all accessible to people. And look forward to chatting again, maybe about something a little bit sillier next time.